The United Nations says more than $3 billion in aid is needed to help Sudan's refugee crisis. Around 1 million people have been displaced after intense fighting broke out a month ago. Nearly 200,000 have left the country, with many rushing to Chad. But the neighbouring country has its own struggles, with a third of the population living in poverty already. There are fears that the fighting in Sudan could create further problems in Chad, with the risk of chaos and violence. DW's Shola Lawal reports from the capital, N'Djamena.
A market in N'Djamena. Another customer decides the price is too high and walks away.
I used to buy my crates of cucumbers for 2,500 francs. Today they cost 15,000, so I have to put up the price and lose customers. It's difficult for me. This is how I feed my children.
Everyone is feeling the pressure.
I used to sell several dresses a day, but now I go 2 or 3 days without anyone buying anything. Even the fabrics have become too expensive. Everything has become expensive.
Much of the grain Chadians eat come from Ukraine. The war there created a food emergency here last summer. That came on top of a fuel shortage. And now, predictions for the economy are being driven down by the chaos next door in Sudan. This was actually supposed to be a good year for Chad. The International Monetary Fund predicted that with the country producing more oil and selling at higher oil prices last year, that its economy would expand. But with the war in Sudan happening so close by, that growth could now be affected. It's not just economic chaos that Chad fears could spill across the border.
Some 300 Sudanese soldiers that were fleeing the fighting in Darfur that crossed the border. They have been disarmed and barracked by the Chadian army. Even if the Chadian government has a state, is trying to keep a very neutral position in the fightings or in the conflict. Chad might be in a way embroiled in that country, in that conflict, mainly from the way the different ethnic groups or communities might engage in that conflict in the coming days.
People here are in a similar situation as Sudan used to be. They're ruled by a military government which has broken promises to hold elections. It puts down demonstrations for democracy with deadly violence. Opposition leader Aboksuma Achenemu sees clear parallels with Sudan.
The cause of the problem is that there's a clique holding on to power. It's the same problem we have here in Chad. How many hundreds of Sudanese were killed because they wanted a transition to civilian government? And here they tell us that the military must stay in power to guarantee the security of the region. But they cannot.
Chadians see the chaos and violence tearing apart Sudan next door. Concern is rising that even if they avoid that fate, that war will only make their lives even harder.
Joining me now is Faith Casina, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, regional spokesperson for the East Horn and Great Lakes. Welcome, you're very welcome to join us here. The majority of people fleeing the conflict in Sudan are now internally displaced. Is help getting to them?
So the situation inside Sudan is deeply concerning. As you have seen, the conflict is still going on. In some areas, a lot more than in others. At this time, it's very difficult to give exact figures, but we do know from the UN that about 840,000 people have been internally displaced within Sudan. A lot of these people are in areas that are either deeply or very much affected by the fighting, and who've actually moved into areas less affected by the fighting. Because of the intensity of the security situation, it has been very difficult for aid agencies to access most of these populations who've been displaced. But we do welcome the recent signing of the declaration of commitment to protect civilians. We see it as a first step in humanitarian agencies like UNHCR being able to reach and access people who need humanitarian assistance and who are not able to get it as we speak.
Now, the number of refugees arriving in Chad from Sudan is still growing. What can you tell us about their humanitarian situation and what is being done to help them?
I think it's important to note that over 220,000 people have crossed over from Sudan into neighboring countries, including Chad. So that's Chad, Egypt, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Central African Republic. Because of the nature of this conflict and how sudden it happened, people were forced to flee with very little on themselves and are arriving in neighboring countries, relying on humanitarian assistance to survive. Where the locations that these people are arriving at are quite remote, with difficult access in terms of aid agencies being able to reach them. And also these are locations that have very limited resources and infrastructure. And so UNHCR teams are on the ground in these locations, working together with national authorities and other humanitarian partners to ensure that people are given, basic necessities, food, water, shelter, healthcare, and everything that they would need to survive in this situation. We're also working with authorities and their partners to ensure that people are actually moved away from border locations, either into existing camps or new camps that governments are helping to set up, so that people are able to access humanitarian assistance.
That was Faith Casina from the UNHCR. Thank you very much.
Thank you.